The night had barely loosened its grip on the city when the door of the Mercer penthouse creaked open. It was 4:12 a.m., the kind of hour when the streets of Seattle were empty except for delivery trucks and insomniacs. Nora Bennett sat at the kitchen table under the dull yellow light of a pendant lamp, her swollen belly pressing against the edge of the wood, her fingers resting on an envelope that seemed to weigh more than bricks. Her marriage certificate had once felt like a promise. Now it was nothing but paper and lies. Inside that envelope was the divorce petition, neatly prepared by attorney Dana Cole, every word carved from heartbreak and determination. Nora had signed it just an hour earlier, her pen trembling, her tears smudging the ink. She had waited, because she needed to see it with her own eyes, the man she had loved stumbling home after another night of business meetings that smelled of perfume and betrayal. The lock clicked, keys scraped metal, and the door swung open. Trent Mercer walked in, shoulders squared like he was arriving at a gala, not sneaking into his own home at dawn. His hair was tousled from someone else's hands, and his expensive cologne was muted by another scent. Sweet, floral, unmistakably feminine. Nora didn't rise. She didn't scream or cry. She simply slid the envelope across the table, her voice calm, stripped of every illusion. "Read it." Trent's eyes narrowed. He loosened his tie, threw his jacket over the couch, and tried to play the scene like an actor in control of his lines. What's this supposed to be? Some dramatic midnight stunt? Nora pressed a button on her phone. A valet's video filled the kitchen, tinny but clear. Trent stepping out of a hotel suite, his shirt half-buttoned, Sloane Avery's laughter spilling into the frame as she adjusted her dress. The date stamp glowed like a scar. Last night. Trent froze. For a second the smug mask cracked, and there was just a man caught in the act. He lunged for the phone. Nora pulled it back. Her hand shook, but her eyes didn't. "So is a marriage. And you broke it." For the first time, Trent's voice lost its polish. "You think you can walk away from me? Pregnant, broke, with no one? You'll come crawling back, Nora. You always do." Nora stood. Her overnight bag sat by the door, packed since midnight, baby clothes folded carefully beside prenatal vitamins. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times, but nothing could prepare her for the weight in her chest. Still, she didn't falter. "You won't have another chance to break me." She picked up the bag and reached for her coat. "The doctor's appointment is at 8. You won't be there." Trent smirked, pouring himself a drink like the conversation was over. "You won't last a week without me." But before Nora could step into the hallway, a sharp buzz rattled the silence. Trent's phone, abandoned on the counter, lit up with a name that turned Nora's stomach. Sloane Avery. The screen flashed again, this time with a message preview. Last night was unforgettable. Next time, no interruptions. Nora's hand tightened around her bag. For a split second, she considered smashing the phone, shattering the lie into pieces the way he had shattered their vows. Instead, she turned toward him one last time. "I lasted 31 years before you. I'll survive the rest without you." Trent opened his mouth to answer, but another voice cut through the room. A man's voice, deep, commanding, unmistakably familiar. "Nora?" Both heads whipped toward the doorway. Standing there in the early dawn glow was Gabriel Sterling, billionaire philanthropist and Trent's fiercest business rival, holding out his coat as if he had been waiting for her all along. And in that frozen moment, Trent realized this wasn't the end of his night. It was the beginning of his downfall. Nora Bennett was not the kind of woman who made headlines. She was a school teacher, a quiet presence in a noisy world, the type of person who remembered birthdays, baked cookies for students who had no lunch, and collected stray animals even when her landlord complained. At 31, she had lived her life far from the neon lights of Seattle's business elite, but fate had tethered her to a man who thrived on those lights, Trent Mercer. To understand Nora's strength, you had to know her beginning. She was born in Tacoma, the daughter of a mail carrier and a nurse. Their house was small, their vacations modest, but love stitched every inch of her childhood. Nora learned early that life wasn't about extravagance, it was about resilience. When her father worked double shifts through the winter blizzards, he never once complained. When her mother came home after midnight smelling of disinfectant from the hospital, she still kissed Nora goodnight. That was the example Nora carried into adulthood. You endure, you sacrifice, and you protect the ones you love. She had met Trent Mercer at a fundraising event for the school library. She was stacking donated books when he appeared like someone from another world. Sharp suit, expensive watch, a smile polished for boardrooms. He introduced himself as the vice president of Northway Hospitality, and she, clutching a stack of used paperbacks, felt a little embarrassed. But he didn't seem to notice the dust on her sleeves. He told her she had kind eyes, and she laughed awkwardly, brushing off the compliment. The relationship escalated fast. 6 months later, she found herself in a whirlwind marriage that felt like a fairy tale written too quickly. At first, Trent was attentive. He drove her to work, left notes on the fridge, and promised they were building a future together. He said her compassion grounded him, that her world of lesson plans and parent-teacher nights was an antidote to the ruthless ambition of his business life. But as his career climbed, the warmth thinned. Dinners turned into excuses about late meetings. Vacations turned into canceled flights. The man who once held her hand across a park bench now scrolled through emails while she talked about baby names. Still, Nora believed in patience. She told herself every marriage had seasons. She told herself her role was to support him, to keep their home steady while he chased skyscrapers and signatures. And when she found out she was pregnant, she thought, naively, that this child would bring them back together. Pregnancy, however, magnified everything. Nora's morning sickness lasted all day. She carried groceries up 3 flights of stairs while Trent texted from limousines. She woke at 2 a.m. with cramps and reached for him, only to find his side of the bed empty. When she asked, he told her she was overthinking, that she needed to relax for the baby. She did relax, on the bathroom floor, forehead against the cool tiles, whispering prayers that her child would be safe, even if her heart was not. Her closest friend, Priya Shah, saw through the facade. Priya was the science teacher down the hall, a woman with quick wit and blunt honesty. "You're shrinking, Nora," she said one afternoon in the faculty lounge, watching her stir cold tea. "You're trying to make yourself smaller so he won't feel threatened, but he's going to take every inch until there's nothing left of you." Nora wanted to protest, but the truth sat too heavily in her chest. She remembered the bracelet she had found under their couch, the one that wasn't hers. She remembered the smell of perfume that didn't belong to her skin. And worst of all, she remembered the silence in the penthouse, a silence so heavy it smothered her like smoke. Her doctor, Lena Ortiz, had warned her. "Stress is poison to a pregnancy. You need calm, Nora." But how could there be calm when every night was another question mark? And then came the confirmation she couldn't ignore. The valet's video, showing Trent with Sloane Avery at a hotel suite. The world tilted, and Nora felt the final chord of her marriage snap. Yet even in heartbreak, she wasn't just a victim. Nora packed her bag. She folded the baby clothes she had bought with her teacher's paycheck, tiny socks, soft blankets, and placed them carefully between her own clothes. She didn't want pity. She wanted dignity. She sat at the kitchen table that night, remembering who she was before Trent Mercer, before penthouses and champagne parties. She was the girl who had written poems in spiral notebooks, who had worked 2 jobs through college to keep her scholarship, who had believed in her students even when no one else did. That girl wasn't weak. She wasn't disposable. And as dawn broke, Nora knew she was walking out of one chapter and into another. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that she wasn't walking into it alone. Because Gabriel Sterling, the billionaire who had once donated computers to her classroom, had been watching quietly from the sidelines. He had seen the stories, the whispers of Trent Mercer's affairs, and he remembered the teacher who had thanked him not with flattery, but with a handwritten note signed by every child in her class. When Gabriel stepped into her life that morning, coat in hand, he wasn't rescuing a damsel in distress. He was recognizing a strength he had seen long ago. For the first time, Nora began to see herself not as the abandoned wife of a cheating husband, but as a woman standing at the edge of transformation. She didn't know yet that her pain would become her power. She didn't know that her heartbreak would become her weapon. She didn't know that her story, once whispered in empty hallways, would soon shake the glittering towers of Seattle's elite. All she knew was this: the girl from Tacoma, who once believed in resilience, had returned, and she was no longer waiting for Trent Mercer's approval to breathe. Because when a woman realizes she is stronger than the man who betrayed her, the world should prepare for the storm that follows. Seattle in winter was a city of contrasts. Rain sliding down glass towers, ferries groaning across the bay, and the smell of roasted coffee drifting from every corner cafe. To outsiders, it was charming, almost cinematic. But for Nora Bennett, it had become a stage of contradictions. A city where her husband paraded power in the daylight, while her nights stretched cold and endless. The Mercer penthouse towered over Belltown, 32 floors above the waterfront. It was all floor-to-ceiling windows and polished marble. A place designed to impress, not to live. The walls were white, the art was expensive, and the silence was suffocating. From those windows, Nora could see the whole city glittering below. Pike Place Market, the Space Needle, the ferries cutting trails of silver light. To anyone else, it was breathtaking. To her, it was a glass cage. That penthouse had been Trent's victory prize. He'd purchased it after closing a $400 million hotel deal, telling reporters he'd finally arrived. He filled the place with imported furniture and rare wines, curated like trophies. Nora, 6 months pregnant, wandered through its cavernous rooms like a ghost. The nursery was still empty, a bare white chamber with nothing but shadows and silence. Every time she asked about cribs or paint colors, Trent waved her off. Later, after the gala, after the next deal. But life was not later. Life was happening inside her every second, heartbeat after fragile heartbeat. She pressed her hand to her stomach often, whispering lullabies into the echoing penthouse air. The baby kicked, and it reminded her that she wasn't entirely alone, even when the man who promised forever slept in someone else's arms. The city itself became part of the story. Seattle's social calendar revolved around a handful of glittering nights: charity galas, art auctions, board dinners, where fortunes and reputations rose or crumbled with a handshake. At the center of this orbit was the Harbor Light Foundation Gala, an annual event held on Pier 91. It was where Trent Mercer planned to cement his empire, and where Nora would be forced to face the truth of her marriage under the glare of cameras. The gala was more than a party. It was a marketplace of power. CEOs whispered deals over champagne flutes. Politicians smiled too widely at donors. Socialites floated in gowns worth more than houses, their laughter sharp as glass. The media called it Seattle's Night of Stars. For Trent, it was validation. For Nora, it was a battlefield. She had helped plan the gala in years past, arranging student choirs, writing speeches for Trent that he delivered as if they were his own. This year, her name was missing from every committee list. Sloane Avery's, however, was everywhere. Coordinator, PR lead, special advisor. It was Sloane's face on the press releases, her name on the glossy programs. The same woman who was stealing her husband's nights was now stealing the spotlight of the very cause Nora had poured her heart into: scholarships for underprivileged kids. Nora looked at the invitation pinned to the fridge, embossed in silver letters. Harbor Light Foundation Gala, February 12th, black tie required. She was supposed to appear at Trent's side, smiling for cameras, a silent prop in a silver gown. But she couldn't picture it anymore. The thought of standing next to him, pretending, felt like swallowing shards of glass. Seattle's weather only deepened her isolation. Rain pattered endlessly against the windows, washing neon reflections into long, streaky lines. Night stretched dark and heavy, the city below alive with music and lights, while her penthouse echoed with loneliness. She would watch headlights flicker on the highway, wondering about the people inside. Were they going home to love or to lies like hers? Yet even in this bleak landscape, there were flickers of defiance. Her friend Priya came by with takeout containers, filling the sterile penthouse with the smell of curry and laughter. "You don't belong in this mausoleum," Priya said, gesturing at the glossy marble counters. "This place isn't a home, it's a showroom." Her doctor, Lena Ortiz, echoed the sentiment during checkups. "Stress is your enemy, Nora. This baby needs you steady. Forget his deals, forget the spotlight. You're the heartbeat that matters now." But forgetting wasn't easy when the city itself seemed built to remind her. Billboards flashed with Trent's hotel advertisements, magazines on grocery racks displayed his grin. And every socialite's Instagram account glowed with photos of him at events. often with Sloane just a few inches out of frame. As February crept closer, the gala became inevitable. Nora knew the moment she walked into that ballroom, the whispers would start. That's Trent's wife. Poor thing. Pregnant and abandoned, and he's still climbing. She had lived long enough in his shadow to know exactly what the crowd would say. But she also knew something Trent had forgotten. Appearances could be deceiving. Because what Trent didn't expect was for Nora to show up differently. Not as his accessory, not as his victim, but as herself. The city outside kept moving. Rain streaked the glass, ferries hummed across the bay, and high-rises glowed with lives stacked one on top of another. Somewhere in those towers, fortunes were being made and hearts were being broken. Somewhere in those streets, people were falling in love or falling apart. And inside the penthouse, Nora Bennett, a woman who had once been invisible even to her own husband, was preparing, not just for a gala, but for a transformation. The stage was set. Seattle, cold and glittering, a city where ambition devoured everything soft. The penthouse, beautiful and lifeless, a cage masquerading as success. The gala, looming like a storm, ready to expose betrayals under chandeliers and flashbulbs. It was the perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. A woman's heartbreak turning into her reckoning, and a husband's empire teetering on the edge of collapse. And when the Harbor Light Gala lights finally flickered on, the city would see not the wife Trent tried to erase, but the woman he could never silence. Trent Mercer learned early that charm could open doors faster than keys. He grew up in a diner that smelled like coffee and bleach, counting tips while his mother wiped tables until her hands ached. By 16, he understood power. The men in suits ate first, talked loudest, and never stood in line. He promised himself he would join them. He swore he would never smell bleach again. When he finally climbed into a corner office at Northway Hospitality, he told himself the vow had been kept. He forgot the cost. In rooms that mattered, Trent knew how to perform. He laughed in the right places, never interrupted a board member, and told humble stories from his childhood to make wealthy men like him more. He wore ambition like a tailored coat. No one saw what it covered. The hunger that made him cruel at home, the fear that someone else would take what he fought for, the belief that love was a luxury for people who had already won. Nora had loved the boy who made big promises in a small kitchen. But the man he became was built for showrooms and headlines. He loved applause more than truth. He learned the price of everything and the worth of nothing. When Trent talked about the future, he mentioned square footage and press coverage. When Nora mentioned the baby, he mentioned optics. "We'll look strong," he'd say. "Families reassure investors." The words clanged like a dropped tray. At Northway, Trent was the prince who wanted a throne. His boss was aging. The board was restless. The Harbor Light Gala was his chance to dazzle. He rehearsed in front of a mirror, practiced a smile that showed sincerity but not weakness, and entrusted the details to someone who adored the spotlight as much as he did. Sloane Avery. She had arrived as a junior PR rep with a perfect feed, perfect teeth, and a talent for reading the temperature of a room in seconds. She called him visionary and let him feel taller. He called her a natural and let her closer than anyone had a right to be. Sloane understood Trent because she understood herself. She had never been the smartest person in a meeting, but she was very often the most useful. She carried portable chargers for other people's phones, remembered assistants' names, and posted the photo within minutes of the handshake. She called Nora Queen with a bright smile and then texted Trent a room number. She liked proximity to power, and Trent liked the way she made him forget who he was when the lights were off. In quieter moments, with blinds half closed and rain streaking the windows, Trent felt a tug of doubt. He told himself he deserved more than diner memories and a modest wife. He told himself love should never slow him down. Then the doubt faded, replaced by the sound of his name whispered at galas, the sting of single malt whiskey, the thrill of Sloane's hand on his shoulder when a photographer turned. He liked winning. It made him generous to the crowd and stingy at home. He said the gala was about charity. It was really about proof. He needed the city to bow. He needed his boss to finally say, "You're ready." He needed the board to stop looking at Gabriel Sterling, who gave away millions without needing a microphone. Trent told anyone who would listen that Gabriel was a relic, a a billionaire who felt guilty about money he hadn't earned. The truth was worse. Gabriel didn't need a stage, and that terrified Trent. Men like Gabriel could walk into a room and change its temperature without speaking. Trent wasn't that kind of cold. He was neon bright and hot to the touch. He never learned how to glow. Behind the mirrors and speeches, there were numbers. Galas are expensive. Image is an appetite that never feels full. Sloan had ideas that sounded modern: micro-influencers, content studios, community activation. The invoices were easy to explain to people who cared about optics more than receipts. "It's a pilot," she told him, sliding a folder across his desk. "Handled off the standard cycle, so comms can move fast." He signed with a flourish and didn't ask many questions. He told himself the foundation would benefit in the long run. He told himself the board would thank him later. When his controller frowned, he smiled bigger. "Trust me," he said. "This is how it's done now." He was less careful with Nora. He forgot that she had a memory like a ledger and a spine he could not see because he never looked straight at her. When she found a bracelet beneath the couch, he called her dramatic. When she asked about late nights, he called her ungrateful. When she placed the divorce papers on the kitchen table, he felt insulted, not ashamed. He believed he had made her, and so he believed he could unmake her. "You need me," he said, convinced. "You don't know this world." But Nora knew something he didn't. His world was just a room with rented lights. The city could love a man at 9 and laugh at him by noon. He didn't understand how fast admiration curdles when stories turn. He forgot that the Harbor Light Gala had cameras in every corner and eyes on every balcony. He thought only of the stage, the applause, the toast. He didn't see the trap he was building with his own hands. Sloan watched his impatience with quiet delight. She had plans that did not include long marriages or modest apartments. She wanted a condo with an elevator that opened into the living room, and she wanted people to know it. She recorded voice notes to herself about timeline to visibility and monetizing the moment. She told Trent to practice pausing for dramatic effect after the phrase, "access for every child." She reminded him where to look for the best camera angle. She kept a folder on her laptop called Mercer Q3, just in case she needed an exit with leverage. The night before the gala, Trent stood alone in the penthouse, looking out at the wheel of lights on the pier. He touched the knot of his tie and pictured the crowd. He heard the imaginary laugh, the clink of glassware, the hush that would fall before he spoke. He told himself the story he needed. "I earned this. I survived. I get to have more." He didn't think about the divorce papers on his counter. He didn't think about the baby. He didn't think about the diner, or the bleach, or the woman who once waited up for him with hot soup. He sent Sloan a message. "Tomorrow we own the room." She replied with a glittering heart and a selfie from a hotel bathroom. He silenced his phone and practiced his opening line again. When he finally slept, he dreamed of applause that wouldn't end and a microphone that couldn't be taken from his hand. Morning came with rain. Nora's side of the closet was partly empty, but he told himself she would return for the rest. He had a speech to give, a world to bend. He had no time for regret. Down in the lobby, a reporter waited with a camera crew and soft questions. Trent flashed his practiced smile and said all the right words. His driver opened the door. The city spread before him like a stage. He stepped in and didn't look back. In the car, his phone buzzed. A text from Sloan. "Small snag, will explain inside." He frowned, then smoothed his face with a fingertip, the way he'd watched actors do in movies. He pictured the first spotlight hitting him. He pictured the board nodding. He pictured Gabriel Sterling nowhere at all. The car turned onto the pier road. Flashbulbs flared. The Harbor Light sign glittered. The doors swung open, and the first gasps rose from the crowd. Trent Mercer stepped onto the carpet, raised his chin, and smiled into the storm he could not see. Because standing just beyond the lights, calm and steady, was the one person he never planned for, and she was not alone. Nora Bennett was walking toward the entrance on Gabriel Sterling's arm, and the room he thought he owned was about to belong to someone else. The Harbor Light Foundation Gala was the crown jewel of Seattle's winter calendar. From the moment limousines rolled down Pier 91, the air was electric with flashbulbs, chatter, and the scent of champagne. The venue, a repurposed warehouse draped in velvet and crystal chandeliers, glittered as if determined to outshine the storm clouds overhead. It was the kind of night where fortunes were flaunted, reputations were cemented, and betrayals had a way of slipping into the spotlight. Trent Mercer arrived like he was born for it. Sharp tuxedo, polished shoes, every strand of hair slicked into place. Cameras adored him. Investors swarmed. Sloane Avery hovered just a few paces behind, dressed in scarlet silk that whispered scandal and ambition. To the untrained eye, she was a mere assistant. To those who knew better, she was the whisper in his ear. The hand on his back, the secret he flaunted while pretending to hide. The gala hummed with speeches and laughter, the clink of glasses, the rustle of gowns worth small fortunes. A silent auction promised ski chalets and rare art. Waiters floated past with trays of oysters and caviar. The city's elite leaned close in corners, voices low, deals sealed with nods and smiles. And then, without fanfare, without a single camera prepared for it, Nora Bennett walked in. The room shifted. Not loudly, not at once, but like a wave rolling through a crowd. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Even the orchestra seemed to soften. She wore a navy gown that wrapped gracefully around her pregnant form, her hair swept into a simple bun, her face luminous, not with makeup, but with resolve. She wasn't the ornament Trent used to display on his arm. She was something rarer, something stronger. At her side walked Gabriel Sterling, tall and composed, his presence magnetic. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. His nearness alone was a shield, and the room recognized it instantly. Cameras whirred to life, lenses snapping not at Trent, not at Sloane, but at Nora, the wife everyone had whispered about, the woman they assumed had vanished quietly. Trent saw her across the room, and for the first time that evening, his mask cracked. A flicker of disbelief, quickly buried under a smile that felt tighter than his collar. He whispered to Sloane, who adjusted her posture, her grin sharp as glass. Nora didn't falter. She walked the length of the ballroom with measured steps, her hand resting lightly on her belly. People parted for her, curiosity sparking like fire. She stopped near the stage, where a podium stood waiting for Trent's keynote speech. And there, as cameras zoomed and the board members leaned forward, she did the unthinkable. "Mr. Mercer," a voice rang out, Dana Coles. Nora's attorney emerged from the side doors, striding with purpose. She held a manila envelope in her hand, her eyes fixed on Trent. The crowd hushed, the silence sharp as crystal breaking. "You've been served." The words cut through the chandeliers, the laughter, the music. A gasp rippled across the room. Dana placed the envelope squarely in Trent's hand, her tone clear and steady. "Divorce petition." Filed and signed. Trent's smile faltered, his knuckles whitened around the papers. Sloane froze, her expression betraying a flicker of panic before she smoothed it into practiced disdain. Cameras caught everything. Nora's voice followed, low but steady, carrying farther than she expected. "You told me I would crawl back. Tonight I walk forward." The crowd erupted, half in murmurs, half in flashes. Investors whispered furiously to one another. Board members stiffened. The press surged closer, sensing a scandal worth 1,000 headlines. Trent leaned toward Nora, his voice a hiss meant for her ears alone. "You think this makes you powerful? You're humiliating yourself." But Nora didn't shrink. She looked him in the eye, unflinching. "No, Trent, I'm freeing myself." Sloane tried to intervene, slipping her hand onto Trent's arm with a laugh too bright. "Everyone, please, this is private." "Private?" Dana interrupted, her voice sharp. "Not when donor funds are routed through shell companies tied to Avery Media." The words hung in the air like smoke. Board members gasped. Investors leaned forward. Sloane's face drained of color. Trent's jaw tightened, but the cameras caught it all. The sweat at his temple, the falter in his breath, the mask slipping. Meanwhile, Gabriel Sterling stepped closer, not looming, not aggressive, but steady as stone. When he spoke, his voice carried with authority born of truth, not performance. "Transparency matters. If Harbor Light is to serve children, it cannot be poisoned by corruption." The audience, once dazzled by Trent, now turned fully toward Nora and Gabriel. The tide had shifted. For the first time in his carefully curated career, Trent Mercer was no longer the star of the room. Nora was. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't shed a tear. She had simply stood, steady and unafraid, and forced the truth into the light. And the truth, once spoken, could not be shoved back into shadows. The cameras flashed harder. Phones buzzed as hashtags were born in real time. Mercer scandal. Harbor Light truth. Nora Bennett. Trent tried to recover, clearing his throat, forcing a laugh. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed. But the words died. No one was listening. Because in that moment, under the chandeliers of Pier 91, the narrative had shifted forever. Nora Bennett wasn't the abandoned wife anymore. She wasn't a whisper of pity in elite circles. She was the woman who stood, pregnant and resolute, and tore down the facade of a man who thought he owned the world. And as she turned, her gaze sweeping the room, she caught Trent's eyes one last time. You underestimated me. And when the applause began, not for Trent but for her, it was the sound of a city choosing its new story. The Harbor Light Gala had ended in chaos. What was supposed to be Trent Mercer's coronation turned into his unraveling. And though the world applauded Nora for her bravery, she felt no triumph when the cameras stopped flashing. The adrenaline drained out of her body as quickly as it had surged, leaving her trembling, her breath shallow, her heart pounding with exhaustion. By the time Gabriel Sterling helped her into the back seat of a black sedan, Nora's legs felt like lead. Her attorney, Dana Cole, followed close behind, keeping the envelope of documents secured in her briefcase. Outside, reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved through the rain, but the driver shut the door before Nora could hear the words. All she heard was the thud of the door closing, the muffled storm outside, and the silence that pressed too heavily inside the car. Nora pressed a hand to her belly. The baby fluttered, restless, as if mirroring her panic. Tears stunned the corners of her eyes. She had wanted freedom, yes. She had wanted truth, yes. But she hadn't wanted this. Her private heartbreak dissected under chandeliers and camera flashes. She had dreamed of quiet dignity. Instead, she had detonated her marriage in front of half the city. Her chest tightened. She could barely breathe. I think I need, she began, but the world tilted before she could finish. The next thing she knew, she was lying on a hospital bed, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Dr. Lena Ortiz's calm face leaned into her vision. Nora, stay with me. You fainted. Your blood pressure spiked, but the baby's heartbeat is steady. You need rest, not war. Gabriel was in the corner, his expression etched with concern but not pity. He had removed his tuxedo jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and looked less like the billionaire philanthropist the press adored and more like a man who refused to leave her side. You don't have to do this alone, Gabriel said softly when Lena stepped out to confer with a nurse. But Nora shook her head, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. I feel like I already am, alone in that penthouse, alone in that ballroom, alone even now. Her voice cracked. He made me believe I was nothing, and I proved him right tonight. Look at me. I collapsed in front of everyone. Dana arrived, setting her briefcase gently on the counter. No, Nora, you didn't collapse in front of anyone. You stood taller than I've ever seen you. What happened after? This, she gestured toward the IV drip. This is just a body screaming for mercy, not weakness. Don't confuse the two. But Nora couldn't shake the heaviness. The hospital room felt like a box closing in. The monitors beeped too loudly. Her body ached. Her spirit ached more. She had imagined the moment of confronting Trent so many times, thought she would feel vindicated. Instead, she felt empty. Later that night, when the others finally left, Nora sat in the dim glow of a bedside lamp, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her face looked pale, drawn, unfamiliar. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, whispering to herself, "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not enough? For me, for the baby?" The baby kicked again, firm this time, as if answering. Still, doubt wrapped around her like vines. She remembered every insult Trent had whispered, every look of dismissal, every moment she had been made to feel small. You need me. You can't survive without me. You'll crawl back. His voice haunted the silence until she nearly believed it again. The next morning, Priya Shah burst into the room, carrying a paper bag of croissants and tea. You look like you've been hit by a train, she announced, her tone brisk, her eyes soft. Eat something before you disappear completely. Nora tried to smile but failed. Priya pulled a chair close and lowered her voice. Do you think falling apart makes you weak? It doesn't. It makes you human. And being human is exactly what makes you stronger than him. Nora finally let herself cry, Not the restrained tears of a woman trying to hold composure, but the raw, guttural sobs of someone who had held everything inside for too long. She cried for the love she lost, the future she imagined, the shame of public spectacle, the fear of raising a child alone. She cried until her body shook and the tea went cold. Priya held her, rocking her gently like she was the child. "Let it out, Nora. Every storm has to break before the skies clear." That night, Gabriel returned, holding a small bundle wrapped in tissue paper. "From my son," he explained. Inside was a hand-drawn card of stick figures holding hands, scrawled in a child's handwriting. "For Ms. Bennett and her baby. You're strong." Nora traced the crooked letters with trembling fingers. Something in her chest cracked, not in pain, but in release. Still, the darkness lingered. Recovery was not instant. For days, she drifted between hospital beds and quiet apartments borrowed from friends. She avoided the news, though whispers found her anyway. Trent denying fraud, Sloane spinning stories, tabloids speculating about Nora's sudden bond with Gabriel. She felt her identity slipping, threatened by narratives she couldn't control. One evening, scrolling absent-mindedly through headlines, she saw a photo. Herself, fainting at the gala, caught mid-collapse. The caption read, "The fall of Nora Bennett." Her stomach churned. Shame returned with brutal force. She slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard. "Maybe he was right," she whispered to the empty room. "Maybe I am nothing without him." The words hung heavy until another thought, quieter but persistent, surfaced. Or maybe this is just the beginning. Nora curled onto the couch, holding her belly, rocking gently. "I don't know if I'm enough," she confessed aloud. "But I'll try. For you." The baby kicked once more, and in that fragile moment, a seed of strength stirred. She didn't yet feel powerful. She didn't yet feel whole. But she wasn't broken, not completely. And though she didn't know it, her collapse was not the end. It was the pause before a rebirth that would shake everything Trent Mercer thought he controlled. The days after the gala blurred into exhaustion. Nora Bennett, still recovering from her collapse, stayed mostly indoors. The city outside roared with scandal, headlines screaming about Trent Mercer's downfall, investors whispering about fraud, gossip columns speculating about her connection to Gabriel Sterling. She tried to block it all out, focusing on her baby, on rest, on the fragile peace her doctor had ordered. But peace is never permanent when secrets are still buried. It began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Nora sat by the window of the small apartment she was borrowing from Priya, sipping weak tea, her body still tender from stress. A knock came at the door. She hesitated, heart lurching. Was it the press? A lawyer? But when she opened it, Gabriel Sterling stood there, rain dripping from his coat. He held a sealed envelope, his expression grave. "I debated bringing this," he admitted, "but you deserve to know." Inside was a flash drive. Gabriel set his laptop on the kitchen table, inserted it, and pressed play. A recording filled the room. Sloane Avery's voice, sharp, mocking, and drunk with arrogance, spilled through the speakers. "He signs whatever I give him. Trent doesn't read half the contracts. He thinks the shell companies are mine, but really, they're ours. Harborlight pays the bills, and no one's the wiser. As long as he believes he's the mastermind, I get what I want." Nora's stomach knotted. She gripped the edge of the chair. The recording continued. Another voice, an unknown man at what sounded like a rooftop party, asked, "And what if someone audits?" Sloane laughed, careless and cruel. "Who audits philanthropy? Donors want their names in brochures, not spreadsheets. And if it blows up, guess who takes the fall? Trent. He's the signature. I'm just the pretty face." Nora covered her mouth. For months, she had imagined Sloane as the mistress, the intruder, the rival who had stolen Trent's loyalty. She had never imagined Sloane as something worse, a saboteur, using Trent as her shield, feeding his ego while siphoning money. Gabriel paused the recording. "My investigator gathered this weeks ago. I was waiting for the right time." Nora shook her head, disbelief battling with rage. So, all this time Trent thought he was in control, but she was pulling the strings. "Exactly," Gabriel said. His eyes searched hers. "And now you have a choice. You can stay silent, let the board and the state handle it, or you can expose them both and reclaim the narrative they tried to write for you." Her pulse raced. Fear whispered that stepping into the storm again could destroy her. But beneath that fear, something hotter rose. Anger. For years she had been silenced, sidelined, diminished. First by Trent's arrogance, then by Sloane's smug deceit. She wasn't just betrayed as a wife. She was betrayed as a believer in the foundation she had once nurtured. Those scholarships were supposed to lift children into futures brighter than hers. And now they were tainted. Nora stood, her voice steadier than she felt. "We don't stay silent. Not this time." That night, she barely slept. She replayed the recording over and over, hearing every cruel note in Sloane's laughter. She remembered all the times Trent dismissed her instincts, called her paranoid, made her feel small. She realized he wasn't just guilty of betrayal, he was guilty of willful blindness. A man so desperate for power, he let himself become a puppet. The next morning, Dana Cole arrived with coffee and a legal pad. Nora played the recording for her. Dana's eyebrows arched, her pen scratching furiously. "This isn't just adultery and fraud," she said. "This is conspiracy. And it doesn't just sink Trent, it sinks Sloane with him." For the first time since the collapse, Nora felt something shift inside her. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was a weapon. A truth so sharp it could cut through every lie they had spun around her. Word spread quickly once Dana filed the documents. By evening, whispers turned into roars. Sloane Avery under investigation. Trent Mercer implicated. Harbor Light's donors demanding answers. Sloane panicked first. She called Nora 3 times, her voice frantic on the voicemails. "Nora, please, we've both been hurt. Don't do this. We can talk woman to woman." Nora listened once, then deleted them all. Trent, however, doubled down. He called reporters, insisting the recordings were doctored, that he was a victim of corporate sabotage. But even his practiced charm faltered under scrutiny. Photos emerged of him and Sloane leaving hotels. Invoices surfaced. The walls were closing in. Meanwhile, Nora felt the narrative shift again. Not from scandal to pity, but from scandal to strength. For the first time, people saw her not as the broken wife, not as the fainting woman on the ballroom floor, but as the truth-teller, the whistleblower, the woman who had pulled back the curtain. Late one evening, Gabriel visited again. They stood in the quiet apartment, the hum of the city faint below. He studied her, his gaze steady. "Do you realize what you've done? You've turned the story upside down. You were supposed to be the victim. Now you're the force that undid them both." Nora exhaled, her hand on her belly. "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because lies don't get to define me anymore." Gabriel's expression softened. "And that's exactly why you're winning." For the first time in weeks, Nora smiled. Small, tentative, but real. Because the twist wasn't just that Trent had betrayed her with Sloane. The twist was that Sloane had betrayed Trent too. They had built a kingdom of mirrors, and now the mirrors were shattering. And in the shards, Nora finally saw herself clearly. Not as abandoned, not as broken, but as the storm they never saw coming. And when she walked into the next board meeting with Gabriel at her side, carrying the truth like fire, every man in that room knew. The woman they dismissed was now the woman they feared. For weeks, Nora Bennett lived in the shadows of whispers and headlines. She'd been called everything: victim, fool, scandal, survivor. Yet none of those labels felt like her. She was tired of letting other people define her story. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to reclaim it. It didn't start with cameras. It started with mornings. At first, it was simple things: drinking water before coffee, taking short walks despite the drizzle, reading poetry again in the quiet of borrowed apartments. She whispered lines from Emily Dickinson to her baby, reminding herself of the power of small words to move mountains. She journaled late at night, spilling rage and grief onto pages, but also gratitude. For Priya's friendship, for Dana's relentless support, for Gabriel's steady presence. Her body still carried the ache of pregnancy and stress, but her spirit began to mend in ways she hadn't thought possible. For the first time in years, she looked in the mirror and didn't see a woman diminished by someone else's gaze. She saw a survivor in progress. Priya noticed it first. One morning, she found Nora folding baby clothes with a calm determination. "You're different," Priya said, handing her tea. "Not lighter, stronger, like you've decided not to wait for permission anymore." Nora smiled faintly. "I'm tired of living small to make him feel big." The transformation deepened when Gabriel suggested she meet someone. Lena Vargas, a stylist who had worked with women in politics, business, and philanthropy. Nora hesitated. "I don't want to be polished into someone I'm not." Lena shook her head when they met in her cozy Capitol Hill studio. "I don't create masks," she said. "I reveal armor." They started with colors. No longer the silvers Trent demanded, no longer the muted tones she had hidden in. Lena draped her in navy, emerald, and deep crimson, shades that said confidence, not compliance. Nora's body was still carrying life, still curving with motherhood, and Lena celebrated it. Power doesn't hide. Power shows up exactly as it is. Next came posture. Nora practiced walking in flats that wouldn't trip her balance, standing tall with shoulders back. She wasn't rehearsing to please cameras. She was preparing to walk into rooms as herself, no apology in her spine. Hair, makeup, accessories, all subtle, intentional. Not the glittering mask of a socialite, not the humble invisibility of the teacher who once shrank in gala corners. Just Nora, clear and steady. But the real makeover wasn't fabric or lipstick. It was mindset. Gabriel met her one evening in his office, the Seattle skyline glowing through floor-to-ceiling windows. "You've changed," he observed. "I'm remembering," she corrected softly. "Remembering what?" "That I existed before him, that I had a voice before he silenced it, that I was whole before he chipped away at me." Gabriel leaned forward, his voice low. "And now? Now I'm not waiting to be whole. I am." The words shocked her, even as she said them. They were truer than she expected, resonating deep in her chest. News outlets clamored for interviews, tabloids begged for exclusives, but Nora chose carefully. She granted one interview to a local nonprofit magazine that focused on education. She spoke not about Trent, not about betrayal, but about her students, about resilience, about how betrayal taught her that survival isn't enough. You must thrive. The article went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was human. Headlines shifted, from betrayal to bravery. Nora Bennett's next chapter. Her transformation was not just personal, it was strategic. Dana advised her, "If you want control of this narrative, you have to step into it. No more hiding." So Nora began attending small community events again. She showed up at book drives, literacy nights, school fundraisers. Cameras followed, yes, but she no longer flinched. She smiled when she wanted, spoke when it mattered, ignored when it didn't. She was no longer a woman scrambling to keep up with her husband's world. She was building her own. Meanwhile, Sloane Avery's empire crumbled. Investigations mounted, her contracts pulled, her social media turned from adoration to venom. Trent fought harder, but the more he clawed, the more pathetic he appeared. Nora no longer needed to lift a finger. The truth was dismantling him piece by piece. One evening, preparing for a press conference, Nora stood in front of a mirror in her new midnight blue suit. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering to her unborn child. "They thought we would break, but we're still here." When she stepped onto the stage that night, the lights were bright, but she no longer shrank. She spoke clearly, not about scandal, but about integrity, about the importance of truth in charity, about children who deserved better than corruption. And when the audience rose in applause, it wasn't sympathy, it was respect. The transformation was complete when she realized she didn't need revenge to feel whole. Watching Trent spiral, watching Sloane's empire collapse, those were consequences, not her purpose. Her purpose was reclaiming herself, building a future where her baby would grow in the shadow of strength, not scandal. After the event, Gabriel found her backstage. "You were extraordinary," he said simply. Nora smiled, tired but radiant. "I wasn't extraordinary. I was just me. Finally me." And in that moment, she understood the truth of her transformation. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who she had always been and refusing to let anyone, Trent, Sloane, or the world, erase her again. And as the city buzzed with her name, Nora Bennett stood not as the wife who had been betrayed, but as the woman reborn, ready for the reckoning still to come. The city had been waiting for the next Harbor Light board meeting as if it were a boxing match. The press circled the foundation headquarters like vultures, cameras perched on sidewalks, reporters rehearsing sound bites. For weeks, whispers of fraud, betrayal, and scandal had filled every business page. But tonight was different. Tonight was not about speculation. Tonight was about confrontation. Inside the glass tower that housed Harbor Light's offices, tension pulsed like electricity. Board members shuffled papers with trembling hands. Donors sat rigid in designer suits. Security guards doubled at the doors. And at the head of the room sat the man who had once commanded all of it, Trent Mercer. Trent's tuxedo was as flawless as ever, but his face betrayed him. Jaw clenched, eyes restless, hands twitching over the stack of notes in front of him. He was determined to project control, but control had already slipped from his grasp. Sloane Avery sat 2 chairs away, pale and tight-lipped, her usual smirk replaced by barely veiled panic. The meeting opened with polite formality, reports read aloud, budgets recited in practiced tones. But everyone knew the performance couldn't last. The storm was waiting in the wings, and when the doors at the back of the room swung open, silence fell like a dropped curtain. Nora Bennett walked in. She wore the midnight blue suit Lena had tailored for her, her hair swept neatly, her presence luminous not from glitter but from gravity. Gabriel Sterling walked just behind her, not leading, not overshadowing, but supporting, steady as a wall at her back. Dana Cole followed, briefcase in hand, eyes sharp as glass. The board shifted, whispers sparking. Cameras clicked from the hallway beyond. Trent's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Nora," he said, voice rehearsed to sound amused. "This is a closed meeting." Dana placed a hand on Nora's shoulder. "Not when fraud is on the agenda." Gasps fluttered around the table. A board member cleared his throat. Let's maintain order." But order was already broken. Nora stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying across the polished room. "You wanted me invisible. You told me I wasn't strong enough to stand in this world. Tonight, I stand here not because of you, but in spite of you." Trent tried to interrupt, but she lifted a hand. "No, you've spoken for years. It's my turn." She turned to the board, her eyes unwavering. "You trusted Trent with your money, your mission, your legacy, and he betrayed it, not just with me, not just with Sloane Avery, but with the children Harbor Light was meant to serve." Dana opened the briefcase, sliding a stack of documents across the table. Bank statements, invoices, recordings. Sloane's laugh echoed from a small speaker, mocking, incriminating. "He signs whatever I give him. Trent doesn't read half the contracts." The room froze. Sloane's face drained of blood. Trent slammed a fist against the table. "Lies. This is manufactured. Then why is your signature on every one of those documents?" Dana shot back, her tone cutting. The board erupted, voices overlapping. Outrage, disbelief, demands for answers. Reporters outside pressed closer, their cameras catching the muffled chaos. Nora didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "For years, you all saw me as his accessory. Tonight, see me for who I am. I am the woman who stood by him when he was nothing. I am the woman he tried to silence. And I am the woman who will not let Harbor Light die in the shadow of his corruption." Gabriel stepped forward then, his presence commanding but deferential. "Sterling Ventures is prepared to match every lost donation and ensure Harbor Light survives. But only if the board severs all ties with Trent Mercer and Sloane Avery." The room stilled. The offer was salvation, but it came with a price. Trent's face contorted. "You can't erase me. Harbor Light is mine." "No," Nora said, her voice sharp as steel. "It was never yours. It belonged to the children, and tonight it comes back to them." Applause erupted, not from the board at first, but from the donors seated along the walls. One by one they rose, clapping, their faces alight with something fierce and certain. The board, cornered by truth and public pressure, had no choice. Votes were cast. Decisions made. When the gavel struck, it was done. Trent Mercer was stripped of his position. Sloane Avery was expelled from all committees pending investigation. Their empire, built on lies, crumbled in front of the city. But the moment of true revenge came not from the papers, not from the votes, not even from Gabriel's pledge. It came when Nora stepped toward Trent, her eyes meeting his one last time. "You told me I'd crawl back. You told me I'd be nothing without you. Look around, Trent. I walked away, and now you're the one crawling." The cameras caught his face, sweat on his temple, fury in his eyes, humiliation carved deep. For the first time, the man who had once owned every room was powerless in one. As security approached to escort him out, Trent turned to the reporters with one last desperate plea. "She's lying. She's using Sterling's money to ruin me." But the reporters weren't listening. Their cameras weren't on him anymore. They were on Nora, the woman who had reclaimed her name, her voice, her place. The flashbulbs burst, the applause swelled, and as Trent was led away, Nora stood in the center of the storm, calm, steady, unbroken. And in that moment, her revenge was complete. Not with destruction, but with dignity, and the whole city watching as she turned her pain into power. The night of the board meeting lingered in headlines for weeks. Photos of Trent Mercer being escorted out by security ran side by side with images of Nora Bennett standing tall, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, her expression calm and resolute. Social media turned her into a symbol. Rise Like Nora trended for days, women sharing stories of betrayal, resilience, and rebirth. She hadn't set out to be a movement, but somehow she had become one. And yet, behind the noise, life had to keep moving. For Nora, healing didn't arrive with applause or articles. It arrived in quiet mornings, in small victories. Making breakfast without tears, sorting through baby clothes without remembering the loneliness of folding them in that cold penthouse, laughing with Priya over silly baby names that would never make the list, allowing herself finally to rest without guilt. Dana Cole finalized the divorce within weeks. The settlement was fair, not lavish. Nora hadn't wanted wealth stolen by deceit. She only wanted freedom, safety, and dignity. Trent fought bitterly at first, his lawyers filing objections, demanding custody leverage. But with his fraud charges mounting and his reputation in ruins, his voice grew weaker by the day. Eventually, even he surrendered, signing papers that severed him from the woman he once believed he owned. Sloane Avery tried to claw back relevance. She posted tearful videos about being used and misled. She appeared on podcasts, blaming everyone but herself. But when investigators released the invoices and recordings, her crocodile tears evaporated. Contracts disappeared, friends unfollowed. The woman who had once floated through galas on the strength of her smirk vanished into obscurity. Nora did not rejoice in their downfall. She didn't need to. Their collapse was not her victory. Her survival was. The true triumph came the day her daughter was born. It was a crisp spring morning when Nora, after hours of labor, held a tiny, wriggling girl against her chest. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks, not the bitter tears of betrayal, but the cleansing tears of new beginnings. Priya was there, snapping photos and crying harder than Nora. Dana arrived with flowers, awkward in her sternness but softer than Nora had ever seen her. And then Gabriel walked in, careful, respectful, as if stepping into sacred ground. He paused before approaching, his tall frame uncharacteristically hesitant. "Would you like to meet her?" Nora asked, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. Gabriel nodded, his eyes shining in a way that had nothing to do with business or philanthropy. He cradled the baby in his arms, his large hands impossibly gentle. "Hello, May," he whispered, using the name Nora had chosen. "You are already loved." Nora watched him, a quiet ache blooming in her chest. For months, he had been her shield, her steady presence. But in this moment, she saw not the billionaire who had helped dismantle Trent's empire, but a man who understood brokenness and chose to help heal it. The weeks that followed were filled with sleepless nights, lullabies whispered into dark rooms, the smell of milk and talcum powder, and the unfamiliar rhythm of motherhood. It wasn't easy. Nora was exhausted, overwhelmed, sometimes frightened. But she was never hopeless. Because every time doubt whispered that she couldn't do this alone, she looked down at May's wide eyes and remembered the strength that had carried her this far. Seattle, meanwhile, continued to buzz. Harbor Light, now under Gabriel's leadership and restructured with integrity, flourished. Scholarships doubled, donors returned. And Nora, though not on the board, was invited to every event as an honored guest. She attended not in glittering gowns but in simple dresses, May sometimes asleep in a sling against her chest. Cameras still followed, but she no longer feared them. Her transformation had come full circle. Not about power, not about revenge, but about peace. One evening, nearly 6 months after May's birth, Nora stood on the balcony of her modest new apartment. The city stretched below, glittering as always, but this time it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like possibility. Priya dozed inside after babysitting duty. May slept peacefully in her crib. The night was quiet, except for the hum of traffic far below. Gabriel arrived with takeout, setting the bag on the counter, his sleeves rolled up like always. They ate on the balcony, the two of them watching the lights. "You've changed this city," Gabriel said softly. Nora shook her head. "I only told the truth." "Sometimes," Gabriel replied, "the truth is the bravest thing." She smiled, tired but radiant. "I didn't survive to be brave. I survived for her." She nodded toward the nursery. "Everything I do now is for May." Gabriel studied her quietly, then lifted his glass. to May, and to the woman who showed a city what resilience looks like. For a long moment, they clinked glasses in silence, the city sparkling below, the future opening ahead. Nora didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe Gabriel would remain just a friend, maybe something more. Maybe the world would forget her name in a year. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she had rewritten her story. She had walked out of betrayal into freedom. She had turned collapse into courage. She had chosen life, not bitterness. And as she leaned against the balcony rail, the cool night breeze brushing her hair, she whispered the words she wished someone had told her long ago. You are not defined by who broke you. You are defined by how you rise. Inside, May stirred softly, and Nora turned back, smiling through tears. Because in the end, her story wasn't about a cheating husband or a vengeful mistress. It was about a woman who discovered that even in the wreckage of betrayal, there could be love, dignity, and a future worth fighting for. 3 years had passed since that fateful Harbor Light gala. The scandal that once dominated headlines was now a faded memory, archived in old news feeds. Trent Mercer was nothing more than a cautionary tale in business ethics classes. Sloane Avery had vanished into obscurity, her name rarely spoken. But for Nora Bennett, life had bloomed anew. May, now a lively toddler with curious eyes and a laugh that filled every room, had become the center of her universe. Nora balanced motherhood with advocacy work, speaking at schools and community events about resilience, integrity, and hope. She had transformed from a woman who once whispered prayers on a cold bathroom floor into a voice of strength that inspired others. And through it all, Gabriel Sterling remained. At first, he was simply present, checking in after long workdays, offering quiet support, never pushing. He attended May's birthdays, slipping small gifts into her chubby hands, storybooks, stuffed animals, building blocks. May adored him, running to him with squeals of delight whenever he visited. Over time, friendship deepened into something gentler, something steadier. Nora began to notice the way Gabriel listened, not just with his ears, but with his entire being. He never tried to rescue her. He simply walked beside her, reminding her that strength and softness could coexist. One spring evening, after a literacy fundraiser, Nora and Gabriel found themselves alone on the balcony of the same venue where years earlier she had confronted Trent. The city stretched before them, glowing with possibility instead of pain. You know, Gabriel said softly, the night of the gala, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen. Nora smiled, shaking her head. I wasn't brave, I was terrified. That's what bravery is, he replied, doing it anyway. Silence settled between them, comfortable and full. For the first time, Nora allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by survival alone, but by love, real love, built on respect and truth. She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. Years of healing had led to this moment. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate, it was steady, patient, and true. And as May's laughter echoed from inside the hall, Nora realized her story had finally come full circle. She had lost everything once, but now she stood with dignity, with hope, and with love she could trust. Because the truest revenge against betrayal is not bitterness, but building a life so full of peace and love that betrayal becomes powerless. So that's how Nora's story closes, my dear friends. And if you're still here with me, listening all the way to the end, it must mean something in her journey touched your heart in a way words can't fully explain. Maybe it reminded you of a moment when you felt broken. Maybe it echoed a time when you doubted your own worth. Or maybe it whispered hope, that no matter how dark things get, we all carry within us the strength to rise again. You see, life will betray us at times. People we trust will fail us. Dreams we build may crumble. But the lesson isn't in the fall. It's in what we choose to do after. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." That is exactly what Nora did. She could have drowned in bitterness, but instead, she chose dignity. She chose to protect her child, her truth, her future. And maybe that's the reminder you needed tonight, that your worth isn't measured by who abandoned you, but by how you rise when they're gone. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Nora's pain became her path. Her heartbreak became her power. And if she can find light after betrayal, maybe you can too. So here's my invitation. If Nora's journey touched something inside you, don't let it stay there quietly. Share this story with someone who might need the reminder that they are stronger than they think. Tap the like button if you felt even a spark of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel, because together we'll keep exploring stories that don't just entertain, but heal, encourage, and remind us all that we are never truly alone. Stay strong, my friends, and remember, you too can rise.